It was a cold night in 1577 Japan. The mighty warlord, Oda Nobunaga, watched the enemy flanking maneuver across the river and commanded his own troops to advance. The Battle of Tedorigawa had just begun. It is Japan in the Sengoku period. The Uesugi clan is led by Uesugi Kenshin, famously known for his lifetime beef with Takeda Shingen. Uesugi Kenshin had allied himself with the mighty Oda Nobunaga against the Takeda clan. Eventually, the Takeda clan was decisively defeated at the Battle of Nagashino, and their influence and power diminished greatly. In a surprising turn of events, Uesugi Kenshin allied himself with the Takeda and cut his ties with the Oda clan. Kenshin was weary of Nobunaga's expansionism and power, and once again readied for war. In 1577, the lord of Nanao Castle was assassinated and replaced by a puppet ruler under Oda influence. The province being in the border between the Oda and the Uesugi clans, Kenshin took this as an attempt to close in on his territory and marched to Nanao Castle. While Kenshin prepared the siege, Nobunaga was informed, and an Oda relief army was promptly set on their way. Before the Oda relief army arrived, Kenshin was able to storm Nanao Castle. When the Oda generals learned of the fall of the castle, they decided to wait in the southern bank of River Tedori. At this point, Oda Nobunaga himself arrived at the camp, so as to take full command of the army. The defending army of Nanao Castle had switched sides after the storm of the fortress, and now pledged their allegiance to the Uesugi clan. With these reinforcements, Uesugi Kenshin marched south towards the host of the Oda. The exact day the two armies met is debated. However, we know for certain that it was early November of the year 1577. The Oda army was led by Oda Nobunaga himself. Among Nobunaga's generals were other notable faces, such as Akechi Mitsuhide, who would eventually murder Nobunaga, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who would succeed him as the second unifier of Japan. Nobunaga's host was mainly composed of Ashigaru, the professional foot soldiers that had earned him the victory at Nagashino. Many of them wielded firearms, though there was no shortage of melee weapons either. Overall, the Oda army had mustered 50,000 men. They outnumbered their enemy by 2 to 1. The Uesugi army composition was more of a traditional one. The core of the army was made up of samurai on foot. Mounted samurai guarded his flanks and rear as well. The total of his forces numbered around 30,000 men. With the evening soon to come, and the men tired from marching, the battle was postponed, and both armies made camp. That night, the Oda host remained ready for battle. Aware of Kenshin's prone-to-action character, Nobunaga expected a river crossing in the middle of the night. He just had to predict when and how. Finally, Oda scouts detected movement on the other side of the river. They were Uesugi riders moving upstream. Nobunaga was now aware of the enemy plan. Kenshin intended to split his forces, with a section of his army crossing the river, so he could flank the Oda army and hit him on 2 sides at once. But in this maneuver, he had weakened his position. If he was outnumbered before, he now stood more vulnerable than ever. If Nobunaga were to attack him across the river before the flanking force arrived, victory would follow. So, the mighty Oda Nobunaga wasted no more time and ordered his troops into the river. As the Oda forces crossed the river and met the Uesugi army, it became apparent that the latter were much stronger in numbers than Nobunaga expected. In fact, it almost seemed like the entirety of Kenshin's army had remained, waiting for the attack. "What's done is done," said Nobunaga to himself, as he commanded his matchlock Ashigaru into the fray. He was confident his gunpowder units would grant him victory, like they had at Nagashino 2 years prior. Upstream, far away from the ford where the fighting was taking place, the Uesugi riders who departed before the battle were on a mission. They had tricked Nobunaga into thinking Kenshin was splitting his forces, luring him into a risky attack, but that wasn't their final purpose. Their true task was to open the river floodgates, so the river current would wash away the Oda army. Back at the river ford, the killing was at its height. Nobunaga was now sure the apparent splitting of enemy forces had been a trick, and he had committed his army to a risky attack. The matchlock Ashigaru, however, seemed to tilt the scale in his favor. Suddenly, a rumbling sound began rising in the distance. The tide was rising. A strong current of water flooded the ford. Most of Uesugi Kenshin's men, warned beforehand by their commanders, were able to retreat swiftly to solid ground, while the bulk of the Oda host was carried away by the tide. As countless men drowned, Nobunaga commanded a retreat towards the south, with the enemy now giving chase to cut down as many survivors as they could. By sunrise, Uesugi Kenshin was victorious. Even though he was initially outnumbered almost 2-1, he had managed to trick the mighty Oda Nobunaga into an unwise attack, thus achieving victory.